Hi. You're all so polite here.
Southern.
We were trying to figure out, we listened to the album, it's been on the speaker up here, and I was trying to figure out, with her help, who do you sound like? So who is it you have been inspired by? So you're more Chris Stapleton than Luke Bryan.
Everybody I've been inspired by, I sound nothing like. You know, I mean, I've got 8 notes in my register that I use as much as I can. I think the one thing I've kind of come to understand is that as a musician or as a player or as a songwriter, my interest is really to try and tell a story, very much like I do as an actor. It's an extension of that. I'm not Whitney Houston by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm not trying to be. And I think one of the nicest things for me, and you have to understand that the origin of the album, I had no intention of making an album. I hear about an actor wanting to do music, and my eyes roll back too. I'm completely aware of the stigma, and I think that that's why I never did it. But Jude, my best friend who produced the record and who I made the record with, and it was really 3 of us. The only people that played on the record were myself, Jude, and Brian McLeod, who was the drummer. And I think Greg Leese played some pedal steel, and I think Jim Cox played some piano on it, but that was it. I had no intention to make the album. I went to Jude and said, I've got these songs and I'd like to record a couple of them and maybe see if BMI or Sony or somebody had another artist that would like to record them. And it was his enthusiasm about the way the songs were sounding and how personally he knew they were to me that made him tell me that he wanted me to keep them and wanted me to do a record with him, and I kind of laughed at him and said, no, I would never do that. And he got a hold of my weakness, took me out and got me a little drunk, and all of a sudden it sounded like a better idea. And so we recorded a couple more songs, and it kind of went like that. And the one way I can justify it is that I love to tell a story. And the stories are actually mine, and they're very personal. And in the context of the tour that we just finished, which was 250, 300, 400 people tops, there was a way to share those stories on a really intimate level that was really important to me. And I went and shot the first episode of a show called Designated Survivor that I'm doing for ABC. And I was absolutely shocked how much it informed my acting. And so I really do believe, for me at least, there is a real common denominator between the telling stories musically and the telling stories literally in the context of an actor. So,
well, you're used to hearing your voice in rooms. You're used to playing to a dumb camera where no one can react no matter if you're funny or what. So what is it like now when you see 200 people? Are you scared to death when you go out there a little bit?
I was surprised actually, because I thought, you know, and I've done a lot of live theater as well. I was on Broadway. I've worked at the National Arts Center for 7 months, and I've done a lot of theater over the course of my career. And I thought that that would translate, and it didn't. Not even close, because in all of those circumstances, I was playing a character. And I hadn't thought about this. These songs are actually mine, and they're very personal, and they're real. And in order to have the conversation with an audience, I had to admit that. And I had to say, no, this was actually my breakup. This was my heart getting broken in this song. Or this was a friend that I lost, someone I loved very much, that changed my life. And some of the drinking songs, these were problems I've had. That took me a couple shows to get comfortable with kind of opening up that way. And so that was and that's the part that kind of made me rethink how I was working as an actor. The characters that I was designing were so kind of specific, and I was never a method actor. I actually disagree with that. I always thought an actor should have complete control over that character and be able to step outside of that character and watch what that character is doing. The music shows changed that a bit for me, and I started to believe that there was a humanity that you could give that was personal and real to you, to these characters as well. And that was a huge shift for me with regards to Designated Survivor, which was only informed by playing 25 shows in California. Long answer, sorry.
That's good.
Cheers.
What was it like doing the Opry last night?
I'm still trying to come to grips with the words. You know, I did an interview before the Opry, and someone was very helpful and kind of helped me articulate what I was trying to say. The depth of humility that I felt standing there was quite overwhelming, and it made the show kind of go like a blur. It was over so fast. Having said that, the joy of being able to play with those incredible players and the smiles on the faces of this band that I've been playing with for a year, I've never seen them smile like that ever. So that was extraordinary. The audience was so incredibly gracious, and the people backstage were so nice. I mean, it's such a huge experience. It's going to take me a few days to be able to kind of summarize that. But just humility was really the thing that I felt the most. I remember when we did sound check going up to that circle, and I remember I was like a kid. I was like, put my foot in like the water, and I was like, oh no, I can't stand there. And there's some fantastic sound engineer walked by and went, oh, step in it, and I did. But it was great reverence for the historical meaning of that place, but again, it was so fast. It went kind of like a blur, and it's one of the few shows that we've had in a long time where I had to look at Gary Briggs, who has been one of my dearest friends for the longest time and a tour manager. I had to look at him and I went, were we all right? We were fine. And so it was kind of one of those things that I'm going to have to live over and over for a little bit and kind of get a sense of it still.
Nancy Brooks.
Hey, I wanted to ask, you're curious when you think Kiefer Sutherland is doing country music. Did country music find you, or did you find country music?
I found it. You know, music for me was something that I became really seriously attached to as a really young person because I had an older brother who I idolized, and he was the biggest music fan in the world, and I just wanted to be exactly like him. And I've made the joke that I was probably the only third grader that was listening to Aerosmith. So country music was not the music that I certainly grew up on. I started team roping in the early 90s, maybe the late 80s. And I did that for 10 years, and I did it pretty hard. And I toured with, my healer was a guy named John English. Toured with a couple other cowboys, Stevie Gilson, Mike Wolf, great cowboys. And we did well after a while, but that was all we listened to in the truck. And what I fell in love with, and they were listening to Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson. All of those guys wrote in the first person narrative. And the joke that I always make is I don't think that Johnny Cash went to Reno and shot a man to watch him die. But he took on the character. And man, that's my wheelhouse. That's what I do. So that's why I started writing in that narrative, was because it could be a character. What I didn't kind of plan on was that the first person narrative was actually mine. So when I wrote this record, they were actually my songs. The only song on the album, which is Shirley Jean, was the only kind of manufactured song as a story outside of my own life. And that was, like, in reference to your question, that was the thing that when I started to play the shows threw me the most was, oh gosh, you're going to have to actually be open about yourself when you play these shows. So I guess we found each other. It was an old pickup truck in 1990, Chevy Crew Cab Dually, and I found country music there, and she found me too.
When you write, you make yourself vulnerable
because you're putting yourself out there. Do you feel like you went over the line maybe in some places? You gave too much of yourself away?
No, I mean, I think the kind of great epiphany that I've had is that you can't. I think one of the nicest things when we've been playing the shows, and I have to always relate back to that because that's the record's not out, and it's the only way I've been able to share it. So who knows? We'll see. But certainly in the context of the shows, the nicest thing that I've experienced is that by the time we're finished the show, I think the audience, whatever perception they might have had of me, realizes that they and I are not very different. And that's been something that's been really special for me, at least, and I think has been special for an audience. And that's something that has mattered to me and will matter to me going forward. So, but, you know, we'll see. We'll see.
When did you start writing? This obviously is not your first set of songs if you've never written that on.
No, I started writing when I was about 15 years old. I can still play the first song I wrote. It's awful. And it's called Mother, Won't You Leave Me Alone? And it makes my mom and me laugh a lot when I play it. But for me, it was more of a cathartic thing. It was a way of, if something was bothering me or if something, I would write to deal with something. It wasn't until the last 10 years that I started writing out of the pleasure of writing and finding a story that I wanted to tell. And as much as the 10 or 11 songs that we put on this record are mine and are about my life, there was 20, 30 other songs that were not, you know, so I do like writing a story. But the 10 years has been kind of, the last 10 years have been really where I focused on that.
Sure.
Not having been there, sadly, can you tell us what your set list was like at the Opry last night?
It was fast. You know, we've been playing 1.5 hour shows, and all of a sudden we're down to 3 songs. And I played a song called Not Enough Whiskey, which we have a video out on YouTube, and it is an old school country song. I played another song called Shirley Jean, which is a song about a man's last night in prison before he's executed, and he's writing a letter home to the only girl he ever met because he went to prison when he was so young. And that's kind of an old school country song, and really something that Jude and I wrote that song together, and that was really a tip of the hat to Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard and guys that wrote songs like that. And then I had the pleasure of meeting via Skype. We were playing a show in Bakersfield at the Buck Owens Crystal Palace, and Scott Cox, a radio guy out there who I'm friends with, was close friends with Merle Haggard. So he and I talked that night on Skype, and he was welcoming me to Bakersfield, and he was so incredibly generous. And then literally 2.5 weeks later, he passed away. So I wanted to play a song of his, and we played The Bottle Let Me Down last night, and that was it.
Second question, if that's okay real quick. When you're making your video, and I saw your video, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Do you find it's just like acting for one of your shows, or is it a different experience for you?
No, it's a great question, actually. This was one of those moments. So Jude Cole is like the partner that I have, and I'll just keep referring to him. He produced the record, an extraordinary musician, and so I was looking at Jude, and I was like, no, this I got in the bag. I'll do the video. That's no problem. At least that I know what to do with, and we'll be done by lunch. And again, it was the same thing. It was my story. No character there. It was one of the hardest things I've ever shot in my life, and there's no cuts. So it was all one go, or one take, one long take, at least to the bar. And no, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to shoot, and it actually took 2 days. I was so embarrassed. So no, it was that's when I started to realize that this was actually very different, and it had, because of the personal nature of what I was trying to do, it was just inherently different than anything else I had done before as an actor.
Can you talk about the new series, Designated
Yeah.
Survivor, and what drew you to that particular storyline?
The writing's incredible. David Guggenheim wrote a script that was incredible. You know, and there's a parallel you can draw from Designated Survivor to 24. You're dealing with a guy faced with an unbelievable circumstance that has to, you know, be better than he is. So there's common ground there on some level. What this show affords me that 24 didn't, as opposed to having running and chasing and finding out who the bad person is, it deals much more with the political ramifications of what would happen if our government ceased to exist. How do we restabilize the country? What is important to this country? How does it affect this country on a national level? How does it affect the rest of the world on an international level? And so by virtue of that story, there are amazing discussions to have that clearly in the most bizarre election cycle of my lifetime, I got a laugh out of somebody, that discussion needs to be had. And so I'm very excited about the show, and it's an extraordinary cast, and very hopeful for it.
They share with you if there's a story arc. I was trying to figure out how this could go more than 1 year or 1 season, and mostly they want to go to 100 episodes to syndicate. So have you figured out, or they figured out, how they could take this to 100 shows?
Well, I think, you know, and it's, again, a really smart question. The head of ABC and the head of Disney, when they first heard the idea, they thought, great concept, what a great film that would make. How do we extend that? Again, it's not as complicated as you would think. You develop characters and you make characters that people will care about, that they identify with, and they'll watch. And honestly, if you can create characters that people really do care about and identify with, you can watch them have dinner. And it'll make you feel comfortable. It'll make you realize that, again, they're not that different than me. You know, in this circumstance, the person who I may laugh about the political cycle this season, there's a lot to talk about. Will it be the high-stress drama of the immediacy of the death of a president for 8 years? No. But nor was West Wing, which was an incredibly successful show, and I think a really important point of view. And so it will live in that world.
Okay, any questions about Down in the Hole, Chris?
No, I don't. I mean, and honestly, I'll talk about anything. I don't care. But God bless you, Scott.
I have 2 questions, actually. On your current album, is there a particular song that has a unique story behind it that you would like to share?
They're sad for me. There's a song called Truth in Your Eyes that I wrote. I've only introduced it twice. And I introduced it once, and I don't know why. I think someone was having a guitar problem, and I had to say something, so I introduced the song, and I lost somebody when a woman that I loved very much, and they died way too young. And I wrote the song, and what Jude did to it musically, which was really, really clever, was he gave it a real upbeat thing, so you might not get what the song was about, but I introduced it anyways this one night, and I explained that I had lost this person, and somehow when I play the song it makes me smile because I think of them with all of their life and everything. And then about 3 weeks later, a woman who was at that show came to see another show, and she had told me that she had lost her husband, and that she'd been dealing with that for 20 some odd years, and somehow that song made her feel better. And so I introduced the song again that night, and I got 3/4 of the way through the introduction, and I lost it. That's all I got to say about that. And we just played